Was it true that a devout medieval couple could only have sex no more than 30 nights in a year, if that? If adultery and fornication were forbidden, why did the church own brothels after the Black Death? These and other questions will be answered right after this. I am Professor Jerome Arkenberg, and I have been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you about medieval marriage and divorce, medieval child support and alimony, and medieval sex. At the end, I'll have the wrap-up quote on this video, so make sure to stick around to the end for that. But first, make sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe and that little bell thingy so I can continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. As elsewhere, girls married as soon as they hit puberty, but men had to wait until they had acquired the property required to get a bride, usually around age 30 to 35, because at that point, usually their father has died and they were able to inherit from them. However, according to the Catholic Church, the legal age of marriage for both boys and girls, men and women, was 14. Most marriages were arranged, designed to promote the economic interest of the families involved. And it didn't matter if you were royalty or the lowest of the lowest serf. All the marriages were arranged. Unlike other societies and civilizations, though, in medieval Europe, both the bride's parents had to consent. So it wasn't just an arrangement between her father and her future husband. It was still an arrangement between her future husband who wished to marry her and her mother and father. But from the 12th century onwards, the Catholic Church insisted on free consent from both groom and the bride. She had to consent to it, even when her parents consented to it. However, parents still forced their children into arranged marriages in various ways, by imprisoning them, denying them food and water, beating them, or even abusing them mentally. Nonetheless, until the late 16th century, marriage did not require the presence of a priest or any witnesses, or a marriage license, did not have to take place in a church, did not require the signing of any marriage contract or marriage registry, though remember from another video, most people could not sign their own name, even if they could read, nor was any marriage certificate provided. In some places, not only was there no dower or dowry, there were no rings given either. At least this guy is putting a ring on it, though. That's a ridiculously large ring. All the church required was mutual free consent, a declaration of intent to marry in the present day right now, even if heard only by one's intended, followed by consummation. In other words, it had to be words de presenti. So you would say, do you wish to marry him? I do. You don't say, I will in the future. I will when hell freezes over. I will and this happened before 2016 with my students, I will, but when the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, which everyone thought was never back then, or I will when the waves hit the shores. There's no condition upon it. There's no future. A future thing is simply a betrothal. So you had to do it in the here and now. And to make it legal, you had to have sex afterwards. Sex before marriage did not count. Unfortunately, at times, this led to unintended bigamy due to a family-arranged marriage invalidated by a prior clandestine marriage between lovers. Now, in the long run, the church's requirement of free mutual consent unintentionally, and I do mean unintentionally, this was clearly not what the church had in mind, but it did prove the foundation for women's rights around the world. For nowhere else did women have the legal right to refuse a marriage. Oh, sure, they might get their father or their parents or their guardians to not go through with an arranged marriage in various ways, by crying copious tears, by holding their breath till they passed out, or something else. But this was not a legal right. Whereas in medieval Europe, from the 12th century, it was a legal right. And the thing about it is, such abuse and forced marriage were grounds for annulment, which allowed one to remarry. It's the only one that allowed you to remarry, and effectively was the modern equivalent of civil divorce. And what are the grounds for this? Well, if at the time of marriage, either party was younger than 14. Remember, the church required you to be at least 14. Though puberty, especially for the woman, the girl, might come earlier than 14, it didn't matter. She had to be 14. If you are too closely related by blood or marriage, that makes the marriage invalid. So you are not allowed to be married off to your uncle, aunt, nieces, nephews, in-laws, which includes father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, or sister-in-law, any step or adopted relatives, brother, sister, mother, or father, godparents, and out to the 6 cousins. Another ground, you are or you claim that your spouse is unable to consummate the marriage for whatever reason. And in these pictures here, these are pictures of a man who is claiming to be impotent. And as a result, his marriage to his wife is invalid, so he can go on and leave her. And how do you prove that? Well, in court, in public court, before the judge, that's the church advocate, that's her advocate. 2 medical practitioners, women, the matrons, are trying to arouse him. If they can arouse him, get him erect, and ejaculate, clearly he is not impotent. Well, I can just see this happening in a courtroom today. Another ground for annulment is either party had not or was unable to give free consent due to fraud, deceit, insanity, force, abduction, or threats of harm to another. Another ground, if either party has been convicted of treason or heresy. If either party was already married to someone else. This is where the problem comes in with no records of it. So, if I wanted to get out of a marriage, all I had to do was say I had been married previously. Was it in a church? No, it is okay. It did not matter. It was not required. Was it done by a priest? No, it's okay. It was not required. Was there a ring? Of course not. In our region, nobody gives each other rings. Were there any witnesses? No, of course not. Remember, there are no witnesses required. Was it words of the present tense? Well, okay, yes. Did you consummate the marriage? Yes, of course we did. Was there a marriage certificate, a marriage license, any marriage contract? No. Okay. And where is this previous wife now? She abandoned me. She ran off. I have not seen her for these many years. More than 7? No, only 2 or 3 years. She just left. Well, okay, you are not married to this woman because you had been previously married to this other woman. Another ground. You are not either party is not a Catholic or was in a state of excommunication. Catholics could not marry non-Catholics in the Middle Ages. If either party had made a public, perpetual vow of chastity, the marriage is invalid. Or had brought about the death of another, including your existing spouse, you made yourself a widow or a widower to enable the marriage. Assuming, of course, that you're not immediately executed for the murder. There was also divorce, Mensa et Thoro, which means from bed and board. This provides legal separation, where the parties do not cohabit, but did not allow them to remarry anyone else. And it could only be granted on certain grounds of adultery, cruelty, or heresy. If you want to get out of it legally, come up with some other excuse, like, I was married previously. In parts of Europe, on the continent, though certainly never in England, and this was certainly outside the bounds of canon law, church law, a woman could divorce her husband if she defeated her husband in a peculiar kind of trial by combat, as depicted in these pictures, wherein a husband tried to beat his wife into unconsciousness or drag her into the hole in which he is standing, while she tries to drag him out of his hole or beat him into unconsciousness. Yes, fairly bizarre. To make it a fair fight, because normally the husband's going to be taller and bigger than the wife, the husband, he was allowed the use of 3 long wooden clubs, but could only wield one at a time, and only against his wife with one hand tied behind his back, while he stood in a 3-foot deep hole. And 3 clubs, because if at any time he touched the sides of the hole, he forfeited the use of one of his clubs. If he lost all 3 clubs, he would just have to fight without them. Meanwhile, his wife got a rock wrapped either in a pillowcase of the same length as her husband's club or in some long sheet. Which is what you see here. She is trying to whack him over the head with a rock, and he is trying to knock her down with the club, and hopefully then either hit her on the head and drag her into unconsciousness or drag her into his hole. If the husband lost, not only was it an immediate divorce, he would be immediately hanged in the town square, which is a certain kind of divorce. Whereas if the wife lost, she would be buried alive in that hole. Neither spouse, of course, could be charged with any kind of murder because this was a legally sanctioned judicial combat. Nevertheless, any children that resulted from any marriage terminated by an annulment or this peculiar kind of divorce were still considered legitimate. And the father still had to pay child support. Yes, in the Middle Ages, there was child support which the father had to pay. And the church would enforce it for you for free. Nonetheless, since church rules on marriage and divorce went against age-old customs and traditions, which in part accounts for some very peculiar cases and verdicts in the church course. For example, there was the case of a man who simply wanted to have sex with some woman he had met at a fair. He asked her, "Hey, babe, I want to have sex and do it now?" Something like that. And she said, "Yes, right now." So they went behind some tent at the fair, had sex. Later on, turns out she got pregnant. The church stepped in and forced him to be with her because, of course, he had asked her to be with him. She had said yes right now. They had had sex. Clearly, that means they were married. Remember, no priest was required, no marriage certificate provided, no marriage contract had to be signed, no marriage license was required. You didn't have to be in a church. Maybe you didn't have to exchange rings. It was not a legal requirement. Dower and dowry doesn't exist. Not required. It's really just customary. No witnesses were present. But nonetheless, he was married. Mostly because the church is trying to put a stop to these kinds of marriages. Anyway, the point is, many couples cohabited, married, divorced, and remarried without regard to the legal niceties of church law. Now, in all this, a key thing to keep in mind, medieval Catholics, Christians, were taught that the mortal sin of lust was invariably present in sex, which is primarily what they got from St. Augustine. But through marriage, the mortal sin of lust could be reduced to a venial sin. It's still a sin, but it will no longer be a moral sin, which will send you straight to hell. Venial sin, you can go to purgatory, eventually, hopefully, get out and go to heaven, as discussed in a previous video. Of course, this assumed that even in marriage, sex was solely for procreation and not pleasure, while done in a certain way and in a certain place as church law approved. And for example, there was an historical study done by this historian couple who determined that probably a devout couple, a very devout couple that determined to follow church law, probably only had at most 30 days out of the year, 30 nights, not days, out of the year on which they could legally have sex. Assuming, of course, that the wife wasn't pregnant or nursing that year. And let me go through this chart with you. This is the one right here. So, this was prepared by really my first professor in grad school, Professor James A. Brundage, and it is contained in his book, which is described in the description below, called Law, Sex, and Christian Society in Medieval Europe. So the point is here, feeling randy, an old word, you say, are you feeling horny? Yes. Are you married? No. Stop. Sin. Is this your wife? No. Stop. Sin. Have you been married more than 3 days? No. Stop. Sin. Because, of course, the idea is, according to church law, you have not had premarital sex. You often may have met your bride or your husband for the first time. And of course, you will be filled with lust on your honeymoon night and your marriage night. So wait 3 days. Is your wife menstruating? Yes. Stop. Sin. This is, in fact, in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Is your wife pregnant? Yes. Stop. Sin. No sex while your wife is pregnant. Is your wife nursing a child? Yes. Stop. Sin. Medieval women often would nurse their children for 2 or 3 years. Seems like a lot. But the nice effect of this is this will space children further apart by years, so the poor woman is not having babies every single year for 20 years. They had many babies, only about half of whom, on average, would survive to become adults. High mortality rates. Is it Lent? Yes, stop sin. In Lent, you abstain from many things, including sex. Is it Advent? The 40 days before Christmas? Yes, stop sin. Same thing there too. Abstain. Is it Whitsun, which is Pentecost week, Easter week? Yes, stop sin. Is it a special feast day or a fast day? Yes, stop sin. Is it Sunday, the day of the Lord? Yes, stop sin. Is it Wednesday, the day the Lord was delivered up? Yes, stop sin. Is it Friday, the day in which the Lord died? Yes, stop sin. Is it Saturday, the day between the day the Lord died and Sunday, the Lord's day? Yes, stop sin. So Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday is totally okay, assuming they're not a feast day or a fast day, on Easter or Pentecost, Advent or Lent, your wife is not nursing or pregnant or menstruating, and you have been married more than 3 days. Is it daylight? Yes, stop sin. Because if you're doing it in the daylight, clearly lust is involved. Are you naked? Yes, stop sin. Yes, I said mentioned in a previous video that most people slept in the nude. But when you're having sex and you're both nude, too much skin on skin will produce too much lust. That's the bad part. Are you in the church? Yes, stop sin. I can see this one. Do you want to have a child? No, stop sin. You can only have sex if you want a child. Okay, in that case, go ahead. Be careful. No fondling, no lewd kisses, no tongue, no strange positions, no oral or anal sex. Only once. Try not to enjoy it. Remember, that's the enjoyment is the lust. Good luck, and remember to wash afterwards. But, judging from the immense number of cases involving fornication, adultery, and children being born out of wedlock, most people clearly did not follow church rules on sex and when it couldn't and could be done. In terms of homosexuality, both clearly existed in the Middle Ages. But though the church regarded it as a sin, it was punished mostly through penances of prayer. It was not regarded as a mortal sin, and normally was ignored by state authorities. But starting in the 13th century in some regions, eventually by the end of the Middle Ages spreading throughout medieval Europe, states began to outlaw it, especially after the Black Death. And why, you might wonder? It has to do with, of course, you should not be spreading your seed in areas that is not going to produce a child. The idea was the earth had been heavily depopulated by the Black Death. The only way to get the population back is to have sex with, of course, your wife under those certain conditions in order to have more children. And if you're gay or lesbian, there will be no children resulting. Same thing with masturbation. No children will be resulting. Also punished. And what are these punishments for homosexuality? It ranged from floggings to dismemberment, certain body parts cut off, I'll leave you to think what those are, or just outright death. And men normally received harsher punishments on average than women. Now, one result of the popular attitude towards sex was that prostitution was quite common. Some areas it was legal, some it was not. And then after the Black Death, and again the same idea, we must repopulate the earth, it even for a while became quite respectable, with prostitutes regarded pretty much like civil servants, bringing in much needed tax revenue either as streetwalkers or in municipally owned brothels, including some owned by the local church. Yes, At times after the Black Death, the church itself owned brothels. The wrap-up quote. When penniless to bed comes Madge, my whore, when all's made up, she drops me a windy word, bloat like a beetle puffed and poisonous, grins, thumps my pate and calls me Dicky Bird, and cuffs me with a fist that's ponderous. We sleep like logs, being drunken both of us. Then when we wake, her womb begins to stir. To save her seed, she gets me under her, wheezing and whining, flat as planks are laid. And thus she spoils me for a whoremonger inside this brothel where we drive our trade. Francois Villon, 1460. Let me know what you think of this quote in the comment section below. Also, what you liked about this video, and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos. And make sure to click on that little bell thingy so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. If you want to know more, there are recommended studies on this topic in the description below, including that of the Professor James Brundage I told you about, along with other ways to connect with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the past.